Welcome to Chapter 6. Oh, it's been a while. Let's get this going here. Chapter 6 is about population and population ecology or community ecology. So you need to know the different levels of complexity. An individual followed by a population. Population is a bunch of individuals in the same area at the same time. So all the rabbits in the area in the forest would be your population. Communities is all the populations in an area. So all the biotic, excuse me, the trees, all the rabbits, all the wolves. That's the community. It's all still the living stuff. When you add in the abiotic, then you get, or the habitat, and then you get the ecosystem. And then, of course, the biosphere. It's the layer on the planet of all living things. Make sure you're comfortable with the definitions here. Again, a population is the individuals of the same species living in a particular area at the same time. All the populations in a given area are the community. Ecosystem is all the biotic and abiotic components. Okay, population ecology, moving on. That's basically the study of the size, distribution, density, survival patterns, that kind of thing, of a population, all the characteristics of a population. So we're going to look at how we determine things about populations, why they are that way, and then how populations are changing. So population size is capital N. You even saw that when you did the biodiversity calculations. Capital N was all the organisms in the area. So total population is N. Population density is the number of animals or organisms per unit area. And we'll talk about that. Population distribution, how they are distributed. There's 3 different patterns. They are clumped, random, and uniform. Random is the least seen, clumped is the most common, and uniformed is seen every once in a while. Random, there's no pattern. It is the most uncommon because basically that says that everything's equal everywhere, and that's not the way things occur. Evenly spaced we see with territoriality, when an animal wants a territory, or with plants they have the allelopathy, which is their form of territoriality, or being territorial. They pose in the ground so no other critters or plants can grow around them. Clumped is the most common. Organisms are found in groups. That is due to uneven distribution of resources. In one area, there's potentially more nutrients in the ground than in others, so even plants will be clumped. Organisms prefer to be clumped because of protection, safety, and numbers. And of course, they're social. So in the picture given, it's the meerkats because they live in colonies. And many animals do. They live in herds or colonies or groups, family groups. So that's very common. Other population characteristics, population sex ratios, the number of males to females. Depending on the population, depends on how important that is. If you have organisms that breed 1-to-1, one male to one female, then having a more even sex ratio is more important. If you have an organism that is more of a herd animal, where you have one male to a large group of females, sex ratio is going to be different. By the way, organisms do change sex. There are organisms out there that change sex within their life in order to change that sex ratio or deal with issues with sex ratio. Population age structure. These are basically your population pyramids. We're going to talk more about these when we talk about human populations than we are in animal populations, because we use them more in human population. But it's basically a pyramid, and it shows you how many individuals are at each age category or age range. Males on one side, females on the other. It's usually, for a wild population, you want it to be very much a pyramid. It's not always that way. But the more pyramid shaped it is, the better. True pyramid. Okay, so population size. The fact is it's very difficult to determine population size. Most population sizes are estimates. And they're difficult to determine. Trying to determine how many organisms, are out in a forest or in the ocean is almost impossible. So we use something that's called the Lincoln Index, or the mark and recapture method. It's a method of capturing organisms, and estimating their size by you catch them, you tag them, you re-release them, and then you re-catch them. And basically the idea is the percentage of organisms you totally catch. The first catch, you tagged 20 organisms. The proportion of that 20 to the total population will be equal or the same as the proportions of tagged to non-tagged or total animals in the next catch you do. So I tagged 20 animals, I let them go. Next time I catch animals, I catch 100 and 2 are tagged. And I do that several times, and it ends up estimating that there are 2 out of every 100 of the organisms are tagged. So that's 2 to 100. So then that means my 20 original tagged would be 20 to 1,000. So my estimated population size would be 1,000. There are some issues with it. Organisms can lose their tag. You got to be careful that you do that. Organisms you don't want the tag to also decrease their chance of survival, attract a predator or something like that. So you got to be very careful with your tags. You don't want your tags to fall off. And every once in a while we actually run into what we call trap-happy organisms. Ones that seriously cannot stay out of a trap. They love traps. They love the free food kind of thing, and they get caught a higher percentage of the time. So if you are able to actually track who you're trapping each time, that might help you determine if an animal is kind of trap happy. So something to think about. We will be doing this in class probably on Thursday. So again, the number of originally tagged, so my 20, divided by the mean percentage of my sample. So that was 2. 20 divided by 2 is 10. 10 times 100 is 1,000. So that would give me my population size. Again, estimating population size. We're extrapolating by a small sample to basically determine if there's a less number. We can also do this in other ways. Number of nests in an area, and you extrapolate it to a larger area. We do this a lot too with traps or with cameras, trip cameras and stuff like that. So kind of like, okay, if I have 2 bears in this area, then I have, 1,000 bears in the total forest. Okay. Why does density matter? How many organisms within an area? And that's because, honestly, there's 2 different types of factors, kind of changing. Sorry, we're kind of changing topics here very quickly. Density dependent, density independent factors. You have to be able to identify these. Density dependent factors. Okay, I gotta pause. Okay, so back to density dependent and density independent factors. Density dependent factors are factors that have a different level of impact on a population dependent on density. So an example of density-dependent factors would be something like food supply. So if you have a lot of organisms in an area, your food supply is going to become basically a competition point potentially, and that would be a density-dependent factor. Something that as the density increases, you might have issues finding enough of it for your population. So it's all the needs for life: water, food, nesting or breeding sites, habitat, shelter, those kind of things. Population-prey relationships are also a density dependent factor, because honestly, the more prey there are out there in an area, the easier it is for the predators to find them. Also, with regards to parasites, if you have an area that's abundant in organisms, it's very easy for that parasite to move from one organism to another and basically spread throughout your entire population. Same with disease. It's like being in a very crowded classroom with somebody who's sick. Makes it more likely it's going to be passed around the classroom than if you are 3 people sitting in a gigantic, hall together, very spread out. That disease is going to have a hard time passing between you. So competition for any kind of necessary thing. And you can have accumulation of toxic waste. This happens in fish tanks and saltwater fish tanks a lot. If you have a very high population and the bacteria can't deal with it and stuff, you're going to get more toxic waste buildup and potentially harm your population versus having only a couple fish in your fish tank. So we'll talk more about density dependent, density independent factors in class, and if you have any questions about them, let me know. So this shows the effect of density on basically lambs, how many lambs, your percentage of lambs that are produced, kind of thing. So as your population gets high, you actually have a smaller percentage of lambs produced because a lot of those organisms, they can't get enough resources to be healthy enough to produce lambs, and so they'll actually produce less. So it ends up being a density dependent factor. Density independent factors are factors that would affect the organism or its survival no matter what the population density is. So it doesn't matter if there's 1 of me or 100 of me, I'm in trouble. And these are basically usually natural disasters. These are natural abiotic, natural disasters, things like droughts, floods, extreme heat, tornadoes, hurricanes, fires, forest fires, volcanic eruptions, human habitat destruction. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's a drought. It doesn't matter if there's 1 of me or 100 of me. I'm going to be in trouble. Every single individual is going to be in trouble no matter what. So these are usually natural disasters. So you have to make sure you know these. Population density. It's just the number of organisms within an area. So you can see at the bottom, they're the same number of organisms in each pond, but one pond is bigger than the other. So the bigger pond has a lower density versus the small pond. So it's just an area versus number issue. If your number of organisms goes up and your area stays the same, your population density is increasing. If your area gets bigger somehow, not likely, and the number of organisms stay the same, it's going to go down, that kind of thing. So as long as you are familiar with that. Population growth models. Let's see. Let's go through this really quickly. Population growth is just how many organisms are being added to the population. So it's births minus deaths. Intrinsic growth rate is basically your optimal growth rate. In ideal conditions with nothing limiting your reproduction, how fast could you reproduce? That's your intrinsic growth rate. So there's 2 types of growth models you need to know, exponential growth and logistic. Exponential growth is basically a J, also known as a J curve. Starts out slow and grows really, really rapidly, basically adding a certain percent to your population all the time. Human population is currently doing this. It has the intrinsic growth rate and it is at full biotic potential. I mean, this is as fast as a population can grow. No population can go forever with this kind of growth rate. It just can't happen. There's going to be either a complete die-off eventually or a crash in the population, or it has to plateau because this just can't. There's no way that there's unlimited resource for any organism continuously. Then we have logistic growth rate. Logistic growth rate starts out exponentially, but then begins to slow as it hits a carrying capacity or limiting factors. Carrying capacity, which is known as a capital K, good thing to remember, is the maximum population size an environment can support, basically because there's some limiting resource. Something is not enough. This varies from season to season and year to year, so your carrying capacity is always kind of fluctuating, but over a great amount of time you end up having a certain limit. So this is a picture of a logistic growth curve. It basically is also known as an S curve. What happens is it starts out J and then it starts hitting what we call environmental resistance. There's some kind of limiting factor, so it starts to plateau off your population at the carrying capacity. Now, in reality, there is a fluctuation around this carrying capacity, and that's why we played Oh Dear the other day, to show you that fluctuation. Because of seasonal changes, because of variations within the habitat, animals have overshoots and die-offs around that carrying capacity. So there's always a fluctuation, and so that's a fun thing to do. Okay, I'm going to cut this off here, and we'll talk about that in a minute.